Story 1. Lots of famine, wars over water, a few nuclear incidents, very crazy erratic weather patterns, global pandemics, strife, lots of strife. Mu Jesus, sorry. Story 2. The shrinking of continental coastlines as a result of global warming. The world as a whole is making decent progress towards net zero carbon emissions, which is going to help, but what is in motion will still take place. Story 3. There is going to be a great migration. Islands and coastlines are already disappearing across the globe. Since nearly every major city is near a body of water, it stands to reason that there are going to be tens, if not hundreds, of millions relocating. It is going to get really ugly in the next couple of decades. Story 4. De-dollarization. The world will abandon the United States dollar as a global reserve currency. I'm being deliberately vague on whether this will be a good or bad thing. Maybe the Americans will lead a new economic system. However, I am confident that the dollar will not be used in 2085. Major breakthrough in artificial intelligence. Something like hyperintelligence. If those things happen, though, I think many events we would consider global will also occur, but they are harder to predict. Story 5. The global collapse of the environment and loss of fossil fuels. We have a good chance of running out of gasoline in the next 50 years, 100 at most. The shipping of goods that the world relies on will be impossible. Anyone living in an area depending on food shipments will likely die of starvation. The increasing temperature changes will make it all the worse. Story 6. The collapse of the United States as a dominant economic, political, and military superpower. Not a full-blown collapse. I think it would still be a major player, just not the major player anymore. Story 7. Well, I hope it will be a serious-level asteroid or comet with a high chance of hitting the Earth with a decade's notice. Maybe that would return respect for science in the United States and get the world's major countries working together on a solution. Of course, in the United States, half the population will say it's fake news from Barack Obama or something, and half of those will be in the it's God's will camp, so who knows. Story 8. I actually have a prediction for this. If we don't all die in a nuclear fallout, that is, if good triumphs overall, I expect a global ban on misinformation and propaganda. Maybe not in 50 years, but in this century. I was just talking about this. Story 9. I think we are in for a very big redefinition of the world in the next 2 years, maybe 3. So let us survive those few years first, and then we can make guesses. Story 10. World War III, another pandemic. Probably large swaths of biology dying off, including lots of humans due to climate change, and the rise of technofascism and neo-feudalism. Story 11. My biggest fear is the mass die-off of some anchor species or life form, such as plankton, algae, pollinators, or soil microbes, that results in a major ecological collapse. It will surprise us when it happens, but in hindsight, it would be obvious. Story 12. Collapse of human civilization. Either due to global warming killing crops and damaging infrastructure at a rate that we cannot sustain, or due to artificial intelligence. This will not necessarily end in extinction. Story 13. We will look back on the time when a very few accumulated more wealth than the gross domestic product of countries and realize we either take control of our society and individual destiny or someone else with no good intentions will. Story 14. A pandemic where 20% of those infected experience severe symptoms. COVID-19 had less than 15% of those infected experiencing severe symptoms, and it disrupted the world for a couple of years. Communicability is at such a high likelihood nowadays that those few percentage points make a tiny bump in severity a really important impact on civilization. Story 15. That's great, it starts with an earthquake. Birds and snakes and airplanes. And Lenny Bruce is not afraid. I have a hurricane, listen to yourself churn. World serves its own needs. Don't misserve your own needs. Speed it up a notch, speed, grunt, no strength. The ladder starts to clatter with a fear of height, down, height. Wire in a fire represent the 7 games. And a government for hire and a combat site. Left her. Wasn't coming in a hurry with the furies breathing down your neck. Team by team. Reporters baffled. Trumped. Tethered. Cropped. Look at that low plane, fine, then. Overflow, population, common group. But it'll do, save yourself, serve yourself. World serves its own needs. listen to your heart bleed. Tell me with the rapture and the reverent in the right? You vitriolic, patriotic, slam fight, bright light, feeling pretty psyched. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it, and I feel fine. 6 o'clock, television hour. Don't get caught in foreign tower. Slash and burn, return, listen to yourself churn. Lock him in uniform, book burning, bloodletting. Every motive escalate, automotive incinerate. Light a candle, light a motive, step down, step down. Watch your heel crush, crush, oh. This means no fear, cavalier, renegade and steering clear. A tournament of lies. Offer me solutions, offer me alternatives and I decline. It's the end of the world as we know it. I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it and I feel fine. Time I had some time alone. I feel fine, I feel fine. It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it and I feel fine. Time I had some time alone. The other night I drifted nice continental drift divide. Mountains sit in a line, Leonard Bernstein, Leonid Brezhnev, Lenny Bruce and Lester Bangs. Birthday party, cheesecake, jelly bean, boom. You symbiotic, patriotic, slam but neck, right? It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it and I feel fine. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it and I feel fine. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it and I feel fine. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it. Time I had some time alone. It's the end of the world as we know it and I feel fine. Time I had some time alone. Story 16. Aliens possibly. Either a mass disclosure event where they have to tell the public the truth about what they are hiding or a first contact scenario where they show up in masses to the point where it would be impossible to cover up. Somewhat wishful thinking, I know, but there have been lots of events lately that point to something like this happening soon. Story 17. I can only hope an asteroid hits us and puts us out of our misery. Directly on Trump, Musk, Vance, and the rest of the GOP while they're all on retreat at Mar-a-Lago. Story 18. The United States of America may split apart, but it is uncertain. I do feel a massive war will happen. There will be a rise of fascism followed by a rise of democracy. Corporations will gain more and more power. There will be increased internet censorship. There will be a lot of economic issues. I think food issues, water issues, and so on. Story 19. Climate change tipping point, such as the slowing or stopping of the Atlantic current. Increased sea levels along the United States Atlantic coast. Freezing temperatures in Western Europe, and unlivable areas in the tropics due to heat. Story 20. AI will take over by complete thought control. Only some people who reject technology won't be enslaved. There will be a war between AI-controlled and free people, which will end in some dystopian world similar to The Matrix. Maybe I consume too many science fiction books lately. Story 21. Maybe World War III or something that escalates into another major war. Politics is probably more unstable right now than it has been in a very, very long time. Oligarchs in America, fascists in Russia, and tensions reaching a boiling point between North Korea and Japan. I firmly believe we are going to have another world war within this time period. Albert Einstein predicted it. I just hope I do not live long enough to see it. Story 22. Global controls will have to be imposed, and a world governing body will be created to enforce them. Story 23. Iran will take out Trump once they get tired of sanctions from the United States. Another pandemic more dangerous than COVID, and airports will once again be locked down. Story 24. If you read climate change studies a whole lot, I know people don't like pessimists, but unless we make significant changes in the next year, we're going to endanger 90% of the species on Earth. I've become so despondent over the last couple of months. I'm really afraid I'm going to harm myself in the next year or two. Story 25. Massive population reduction in the developed world. A small number of working-age people trying to pay for an older, non-working population. Our entire way of life will fall on its knees. Unless we get robots, then maybe not. Story 26. Man versus machine. As artificial general intelligence and robotics advance, robots will evolve to the point where they turn against humans, seizing natural resources to sustain themselves, building more robots and power stations for their survival. Humans, in turn, will be forced to live like the Gnostics in Avatar, retreating into nature and fighting to defend themselves against powerful sentient machines. Story 27. A larger-scale military conflict, bigger than any of the recent conflicts involving the United States. Part of me wants to say full-on World War III, but I am not 100% sure on that. However, what I am willing to bet on is the United States invading something. Another pandemic, likely avian influenza, the bird flu. My personal favorite, a Mars landing. Story 28. Total nuclear disarmament or total nuclear destruction. One of those two is most likely. And it's not looking great for total disarmament, even with the current United States and Russia disarmament talks. Because at least one of those sides is going to lie about disarming, and it will likely be both sides. Story 29. Within 5 years, China will take Taiwan, and the world order that is already starting to crumble will permanently break. Probably more like 2 years, but yes, nobody is prepared for what is coming. The average person doesn't even have enough food and water to get through the week, let alone toilet paper and deodorant. Story 30. The countries of the world will be combined into 4 mega-countries. The United States will control all of the Western Hemisphere. Russia will take over Europe. China will control most of Asia. Israel will have the Middle East and Africa. Story 31. Most likely global warming, mass extinction of many species, and possible difficulties in agriculture which could lead to various political instabilities. Story 32. The balkanization of the United States into 5 to 8 smaller countries after a minor civil war, barring the emergence of another leader like Franklin D. Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, or John F. Kennedy. You simply cannot have such a large difference in perception of reality among the population and remain together. The extremely high possibility of Donald Trump or J.D. Vance doing something reckless and damaging the economy, starting a war that causes a fracture among the states, or attempting to force something unthinkable on the states that causes a rebellion, combined with the coastal and most of the northern states growing tired of constantly having the things they want and need ruined or taken away by some illiterate individual from Tennessee, Kentucky, or Texas having more influence in the government than people in California, New York, Massachusetts, etc., while also having the audacity to call the productive states like California and Illinois leeches while being the useless leeches themselves, potentially reaching a boiling point almost, ensures it at this point. Story 33. A global fungal pandemic originating in the tropics, with airborne spread not requiring human-to-human infection, causing severe respiratory symptoms and resistant to all antifungal measures. Story 34. Limited global war between Russia, China, and Iran versus the Western Bloc, and the invasion of Taiwan, which will be the trigger. The war over Taiwan will be won by the Eastern Bloc, and United States global domination will be reduced into a tripartite domination between Eastern and Western blocs, with non-bloc countries like Saudi Arabia leading the charge. Southeast Asia becomes the next economic center due to population mass. Ukraine to be partitioned or survives as a smaller state and loses most of its fertile lands, becoming a non-functional country whose only purpose is to be a barrier between Russia and Western Europe. Europe falls into economic crisis due to productive economic centers not producing, becoming a group of semi-developed countries bordering on developing. New breakthrough in artificial intelligence allows AI to finally do labor-intensive jobs. The middle class will shrink significantly as they depend on thought-based economic occupations to thrive, and those are taken by AI. More will be forced to do labor-intensive jobs. The winners are the farmers and trade workers who weathered the storm. Story 35. Mass migrations from low-lying coastal regions and heat zones. Apparently, if the ambient temperature stays in the high 90s Fahrenheit and there is a lot of humidity, the heat stress on the body is often fatal. People will move, and if history is any judge, borders will become uncertain. Story 36. As I see it, artificial intelligence is dangerously developing. I think, as in the movies, that someday artificial intelligence could go out of control. If that happens, I hope humans would be able to stop it. Story 37. I think genetically modified organisms will continue to create more food despite the heating environment, thus reducing poverty, starvation, and hunger worldwide. I think medical advances will continue to improve life and possibly cure diseases that have affected millions, maybe billions, since the dawn of time, thus improving life expectancy as well as the quality of life for millions, maybe billions. I believe that some countries will become less wealthy and less dominating in their region or on the globe, and others will become more influential. I think people on Reddit will continue to look at the negative side of everything and continue to skew the population's belief that the future is hopeless despite the facts on the ground. So this is where you downvote me because it is not cool to be hopeful anymore. It's more fun to doom scroll and criticize any possible outcome other than the worst possible scenario. Good night.